Hello and welcome to today's virtual event. My name is Pavel and I am the Communications Director at the Tor Project. I am excited to be your host for the next 50 minutes and to guide you through today's event, which is organized around the demonstration of the latest addition to our community and outreach materials that you can now find on our website. This project that we have internally dubbed as Postbox is a collection of anonymous user stories that help shed light on how people's experiences and their ability to connect with the world are shaped by being able to access the internet privately and anonymously. Whenever I'm asked about the work that Tor does, I find that nothing illustrates the impact on people's lives better than letting our users speak for themselves. But unfortunately, not everybody can do so safely, which is why today we have invited a group of people who can. First, you'll hear from my colleague Raya, the Tor Project's education coordinator, who works with the community team and who will share some of her insights from the digital safety and security trainings that she conducts and what she has learned about some of the more critical use cases for privacy preserving technology. After that, I am joined by a panel of journalists, internet researchers, and cybersecurity experts to discuss the outlook and challenges for digital human rights work in 2024. But first, I'm going to toss it over to Andrew Fishman, the president and co-founder of the Intercept Brazil, who has kindly provided us with a pre-recorded opening address to kick us off. So let's get started.
Hi, I'm Andrew Fishman, the president and co-founder of the Intercept Brazil, which is a nonprofit investigative newsroom in Brazil that's focused on politics, corruption, human rights, technology, the Amazon. And I'm here because there's a huge problem. Not enough people are using Tor. And it's up to all of us, everybody who's in this, listening to this call right now, to help those people out and teach them why it is such an important tool. And so Tor knows this, and they have launched this new tool today called the User Stories Hub, which is meant to make it easier for all of us to express to others when you can use Tor, in what cases, how it works, by taking individual case studies, individual stories, and showing how it made a difference in these people's lives. And so for me, it can serve as this amazing gateway drug to bring people to full digital security consciousness. And if there's one thing that you remember from this whole presentation today, it's that you should remember that Tor, which was already very useful and important, has gotten way easier to use and has gotten a lot faster in the last year. So if you haven't used it recently, you should log back on and check it out and see how things have gotten better recently, because the team has been working hard to make really huge improvements and lower the bar to entry for common users. So this whole event, the User Stories Hub, is about personal experiences, and I was asked to talk a little bit about my personal experiences, and since we don't have a whole lot of time, I'm just going to jump right into it. So I'm an investigative journalist, so proper digital hygiene for me can mean the difference between life and death for me and my sources, or a lifetime in jail for people, and so it's something that we need to be taking very seriously. And that is why I and my colleagues throughout my career have always used Tor. We use it for researching sensitive stories, like we did during the Snowden leaks, to make sure that we weren't revealing sensitive information that may or may not should or should not have been published. We used we use a Tor-based tool called SecureDrop for sources to be able to contact us safely and anonymously, so that they can maintain their anonymity with us, and also make sure that no third party is able to find out who they are, so they can do their brave work and help us expose corruption and misdeeds. Tor and other digital security tools were absolutely essential for us during Vaza Jato, which was a major scoop that the Intercept Brazil did in 2019, that focused on the politicization of Operation Car Wash, which was this huge anti-corruption investigation in Brazil that led to President Lula da Silva being sent to jail, and our reporting allowed him to be released from jail because proof of the politicization and the lack of evidence. To do this series had major political repercussions, and we knew that the level of threat was really high. And so to give you a sense of that, we had to close our office for a week after we got doxxed by a right-wing congresswoman. Me and my team had to spend a week in safe houses because we had been tipped off that there was this imminent raid by the federal police. And going through these experiences and these really high-stakes moments, what became very clear to me, and fortunately this was clear to me beforehand, is that you really need to be prepared ahead of time. You can't wait until you realize that the danger is knocking on your door and suddenly decide that you're going to become a digital security expert and you're going to train your whole team and research all the right software and implement it. Because by that point, it's too late. Either you've already been burned in your first contact with the source or whatever it may be, or because you just don't have the time to gear up and get everything done when you're in the middle of dealing with a crisis or a major investigation or a major operation. And so that's why you need to have things prepared ahead of time, and then once the moment comes, you can just turn the switch and turn it on. Fortunately, we were in that situation, and that really helped us out at the time, but I wouldn't say that many other newsrooms can say the same, and that needs to change, and that's something that we need to evangelize about. We need to educate people, and I'm glad that Tor is taking the time and the resources to bring together people like yourselves and also create initiatives like this to help people make it easier to understand why they need to take digital security so seriously. Because, as I've seen in my personal experiences, situations can change really quickly, be it in your organization or national politics. Ask your friends in Argentina in the last few weeks or month. Ask your friends in India or in Turkey. But it's also true in Western democracies. I mean, the United States right now is probably the greatest threat to press freedom in the world. Whether it's persecution of publishers like Julian Assange for trying to do journalism, whether it's supporting the mass murder of civilians and over 100 journalists in Gaza, or it's ongoing mass espionage through the NSA. So we need to stay vigilant, but we also need to let people know that it's 2024. You don't need to have a PhD in computer science to use proper digital hygiene. The tools have become increasingly user-friendly. Tor is one of those, and it means that it's easier for all of us, normal people, activists, journalists, and specialists, to fight back. And so that's what we need to do, and stay safe. So please keep up the good fight. Thank you all for participating in this event and for caring enough to be here. And thank you all for your amazing works. I know that everyone in this audience is leaders and activists, people who really care. So thank you to the amazing team at Tor, and have a great rest of your event. Thank you. Bye.
All right. Thank you, Andrew, for your critical intervention. It's always valuable to hear from journalists who make use of Tor to protect their work, their sources, and really hold people in power accountable. And hello, everyone. My name is Raya. I work with Tor as an education and communities coordinator. I'm here to introduce you to Tor's Postbox, which is basically a gallery of stories from people all around the world who regularly use not just Tor, but also encrypted tools more generally. So before I do this, just let me tell you more about the work my team does within Tor, which involves interacting with a lot of people around the world and explaining what encryption is and why privacy matters. So I spend most of my time with the Tor Project running trainings, mainly for journalists and people who work to defend and extend human rights. The trainings focus mostly on how to protect from certain kinds of surveillance and how to bypass certain kinds of censorship. In trainings, online and off, people consistently share stories with me of what it is that got them to attend. So to share a few tidbits from my personal postbox, In one online training that I gave to Palestinian school kids in Jerusalem, the teacher kicked off the session by saying that the Israeli occupation forces are always stood at the doors of the school with their weapons, threatening to arrest the school kids, and they regularly seize the kids' smartphones to search them. So the teacher stopped and called on me. She said, the kids need to know how to handle the data on their phones in such situations because the simplest picture, the simplest message, the simplest browsing history could lead to administrative detention and torture. Worth noting that each year you have around 500 to 700 Palestinian children that are detained by the Israeli occupation. On a different occasion, in a training that I wasn't giving but attending, someone came up to me during the break and without ever learning that I worked with Tor, shared why he thought tools like Tor were useful. We were talking about the Arab Spring, and he said that there were many bloggers during the 2011 revolution in Tunisia. And as bloggers do, they always freely criticized the regime on their websites. Many of them were arrested as a result, but those who weren't, we discovered later, they were using Tor to cover their tracks. So I learned a lot from anecdotes like these, and I sculpt training delivery accordingly. But this is also what inspired us actually at the Tor Project to share these stories openly. So to answer the question of why Tor matters, our users have the answers for you. But we cannot talk about privacy meaningfully without talking about surveillance and who practices it. Today, as governments continuously push for legislation encouraging encryption backdoors, as the Tor Project, we felt it necessary to surface experiences that counter state narratives around privacy, preserving tech. It doesn't need a reminder that privacy is one, a human right, and two, a prerequisite to the realization of other human rights and democratic rights, perhaps most essentially the right to free expression and the right to information access. Reshaping power dynamics, said one user about encryption in one of the testimonials, and that is not a light assessment of encryption's benefits, because in defending dissent, encryption gives space for movement building. So through reading these testimonials, we learned that Tor, or as I like to call it, the real incognito mode, is an important tool not only for journalists, organizers, advocates, but also parents, teenagers, all those who seek to roam freely on the internet. But shouldn't that be everyone? Because we tend to forget that the internet's default setting is that you or we don't roam alone. All right, so let's take a quick tour of Tor's Postbox. So we initially launched a humble survey and shared it on our mailing list, asking people who use Tor to answer a few questions, and anonymously, of course, about their use of encrypted tools, their use of Tor, and their perceptions of it. And so we, in this page, curated people's stories, arranged them in different categories based on the use case, as you see here. And it showcases really the wide variety of uses for Tor and encrypted tools. As I said, from parents who use it to protect maybe their children's privacy, to investigative journalists who work to communicate with sources and end up working to publish things that hold governments accountable. I'll read out a few stories for you from this list here, this wonderful list that we put together, and really stories that have stayed with me. So one story from Nia. Nia works within the media field. She's a journalist. And just to note that we picked pseudonyms on top of the fact that we know that users perhaps themselves chose pseudonyms, but to add a layer of obfuscation. Nia says, journalism isn't free and fair. You are free to say what you feel at the risk of job loss and prison for expressing anything contrary to the wishes of whoever is in power of your jurisdiction. You have that right to say it and suffer. All transactions must use encryptions. Emails, messages, hard drives, individual files require encryption. Encryption is important because it protects the work of those who hold to account the ones in power. Another story from Jackson. Jackson shares a story that I think reflects what many think of privacy, that it's not an issue of personal concern, but he makes an important distinction that our right to privacy is also interdependent to others' respect of the right to privacy. So Jackson shares, really, I personally don't need to worry much about my privacy, but I use Tor to protect others. It is such an important issue for journalists and activists, so I want to support strengthening privacy and encryption laws to serve all users. And finally, one story from Fumi, who shares that they used Tor to obtain documents from WikiLeaks, which helped expose local surveillance by military units of janitorial union organizing meetings and groups pressing for the rights of migrant workers. And so Fumi really highlights the use of Tor here to one, cover our tracks while we're doing very important work, so the work doesn't stop early on, but also protect users. A very sweet thing about the user stories portal is that you can obviously share these stories, the ones that you like, the ones that stay with you, on your favorite social media channels. So I'm just gonna go ahead here and show you how to share on Twitter, and we're gonna share it on Tor's Twitter. So I'll post it. And that's it from me. I wanted really to highlight the fact that Tor's Postbox is one way to show the multifaceted and depth of Tor's use in encrypted tools. All right, thank you very much, Pavel, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Raya. This was really insightful, and I think it's great to always have a demonstration like this. At this point, I would also like to thank all of the more than 800 users who took part in our survey and consented to having their stories shared anonymously. And this is also a little bit of a call to action. If you feel encouraged to tell us your story, please complete our survey and share your experience. I will link to it in just a second. This is just the beginning of it. We will continue to update these stories. We might add some more categories. So we're really interested in learning more about how people are staying safe online with other tools, not just with Tor. So as I said, I have invited a group of people who are better equipped to speak to some of the experiences and some of the challenges that people face on the internet today. And I couldn't be more excited to be talking to this next group of people who are really dedicated to safeguarding and advancing people's human rights online in their respective professions. So let me introduce you to Cecilia Maundu, a broadcast journalist, a digital rights researcher, and a digital security trainer. She's currently working at Internews as a community mobilizer and sustainability coordinator. She works at the intersection of journalism, technology, and human rights, with a focus on countering online abuse against women journalists while protecting freedom of expression online. She's also a podcaster. She has a podcast called the Digital Data Podcast. Digital Data is a podcast focused on discussing issues to do with digital rights and digital safety. Welcome, Cecilia.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're also joined by Donncha, who is a hacker and cybersecurity expert. He leads the security lab at Amnesty International, which exposed the global spyware surveillance crisis through the Pegasus project, and continues to play a critical role in exposing surveillance abuses with the predatory files and other wide-ranging investigations. Hi, Donncha. How are you today?
Hi, Pavel. Very good, thanks. Good to join you.
And last but not least, Mahsa Alimardani is an internet research focusing on the Middle East and North Africa region with a specialization on Iran. She has worked on matters related to human rights, technology, and freedom of expression online for over a decade within civil society, and is currently a senior researcher with the international human rights organization Article 19, leading their digital rights projects on content moderation in the MENA region and digital rights within Iran. She's also a PhD candidate at the Oxford Institute at the University of Oxford and has previously served as a senior information controls fellow for the Open Technology Fund at the University of Oxford. Welcome so much. I'm actually going. How are you today, Mahsa?
Thanks for having me. Sorry for that long bio. I thought it was supposed to be a text, not for you to say out loud. I would have shortened it.
Well, this is totally on me, but I'm actually going to get you started, and I'm going to stay with you for a while the focus is already on you. And I know you actually like to highlight some other people's stories. And when we spoke before today's event, you said that ultimately the situation is bleak, but hopeful as it comes to digital human rights. Maybe you can set the stage for us and tell us why is it bleak, and what are we dealing with today more so than ever?
Yeah, so I mean, during the past year and a half, I've been focusing on helping with the mass arrests that have been happening with the onset of the Women Life Freedom movement in Iran. It started in September 2022, and it's kind of continued in different shapes and forms to this day, especially in the forms of digital repression that we've been seeing. And so the work that we've been doing in this space, it seems almost like you can do as much advocacy and work as you can focused on countries that are so repressive like Iran, but ultimately you're not going to really be able to impact them and their behavior. The kind of impact you really can have is on, the habits and tools at the disposal of activists, of civil society, and working with tech companies to really try to for them to empower their platforms for these vulnerable users. And so that's really been where we find, in this very bleak world of where we've seen, hundreds of activists and protesters killed on the streets, where we've been seeing really horrific executions of protesters. There was just one this past week from this movement that was especially horrific because he was someone with a mental disability who should never have been even tried. And they horrifically killed him on Monday. And so, in the face of all of this, it often seems like, what can we change? Well, we have seen with the kind of work that we have done, the impacts we have been able to have on individual lives, from preventing, cases from getting further criminalization by just going through different protocols to help secure folks in terms of their accounts and their devices for when they are protesting and out on the streets. And so that really has been the focus of, if you helped 10 or 20 people evade a very tiresome court case or evade a case that could lead to execution because the state didn't have digital evidence to further persecute someone, that's really where the focus and the will to kind of go on, where you see the impact, because sometimes the bigger picture you don't always see the impact.
Yeah, and so I want to talk about the impact a little bit, specifically address this to Cecilia, because while the events in Iran, I think, were highly visible to a certain extent in the public and very well covered, I know that you as a reporter sometimes have a hard time covering these aspects. And I was curious to learn a little bit more about some of the challenges that you face as a reporter specifically when tackling these issues.
Well, one of the challenges that we actually face is the issue of language, because we know there are different terminologies. We don't come from English-speaking nation. So you find yourself struggling in a way that you can be able to break down the concept to the people. And also, majority of our population lives in the rural areas. So you find in the rural areas, actually, the main language is Swahili and what we call like mother tongue. So you find also a lot of people, there is a digital divide. You find a lot of people are not consuming the content you're talking about. Also repressive regime, because you find like we have very repressive laws when it comes to the issue of cyber laws. Yes, they are there, but they were created not specifically to infringe on freedom of expression. But when you go through the laws, most of the time you find that they actually aging on infringing on freedom of expression. Another thing, there is the issue of online harassment, especially that is targeting female journalists in this part of the world. And this is a global issue. It's not even specific to Kenya. It cuts across different parts of the world, whereby women journalists are really harassed, because now journalism has moved. In many parts of the world, journalism has moved on the digital platform. Our audience is no longer passive, rather active, because in a single tweet, or do we call it tweet nowadays, or now that we are on X, I'm not sure, with a single tweet, you've put a story out there and you find 1,000 comments, and 80% of them are really targeting you as a person. So that is also another issue that is there. And we talked about the issue of accessibility. How many people can be able to access this content on the digital platform? We are not only talking about accessibility, but meaningful accessibility. You go to places, yes, there is internet, but people are struggling. And not even that, some areas we are talking about, they don't have electricity to charge these gadgets. So those are some of the issues that are really crippling up. And also when it comes to the issue of information being out there, the government is not doing enough when it comes to such issues. It's still seen as a very lucrative area. You're talking about things to do with digital rights. We're here talking about getting clean water to the people. So you see that demarcation also really interferes with the information that you're trying to put out there. So those are some of the many issues, just to mention a few, that is being faced in this area.
Thank you so much for sharing this. I'm going to toss over to Donncha in just a second, but I do want Mahsa maybe to give a chance to follow up and dive a little deeper into the aspects of self-publishing and commenting publicly, and how that puts people at risk. I know that your work is really focused on protecting individuals there, or helping them out once data has been and tweets and posts and whatever we're calling the self-published content that puts them in dangerous situations.
Yeah, so I mean, the space for this kind of expression in a context like Iran, and I'm sure many other contexts, is often very limited. And so just that act of self-publishing and expressing yourself, or expressing a factual story, can put you under enormous danger. And so we have seen this kind of silencing of the journalist class, who have been using their real names and being very careful about what they post online in the sphere. And then, of course, you have this cadre of citizen journalists, of activists who have been posting documentation of human rights abuses, and they often do this anonymously. And we've seen an increase of effort of Iranian authorities actually really investing a lot onto X or Twitter to kind of uncover who people are and to go after them and to arrest them. And actually, in terms of state propaganda, in terms of people trying to like DM folks on that space, the efforts and resources have been really ramped up. And it's really frightening at a time when the platform itself has severely decreased the resources they've been putting into supporting activists and supporting different policies and mechanisms for protection. So this coincidence is really scary, actually, of these two events at the same time.
And I think this really tees me up nicely for Donncha, because I would like for you to weigh in on this, because I know obviously your work is really centered on looking at how these resources are being stripped of people. And so I would like to understand a little bit more about what strategies you're seeing, and also you're helping people and individuals with, to be able to stay safe and continue to express themselves more freely.
Pavel, first I'd like to maybe take a step back and explain a little bit of some of the different kinds of threats we're seeing in terms of surveillance, in terms of impinging on civic space, and different ways that we can try to tackle this. So I work at Amnesty International, a global human rights organization, where I head up our security lab. And our security lab is involved in investigating and documenting human rights violations using technology, particularly around surveillance and spyware, and trying to create a world where journalists, activists, and civil society more broadly can communicate free from the fear of unlawful surveillance. So I know in our own work, surveillance is a big threat, and we rely on tools such as Tor. We rely on tools such as Tor every day to be able to do our research in a ways that protects our privacy and avoids tipping off governments and corporate actors who are engaging in this kind of surveillance. And so these are really crucial for much of our research. Tools such as Tor are also something we recommend to all of the activists that we work with, to help them be able to access human rights information and be able to express themselves freely without fear of tracking and intimidation. I think like the opening speaker said, many times we don't necessarily know what the threats are in advance, and it's important to always be mindful that states and corporate actors have advanced kind of mass surveillance tools that they can use to collect data about all of your browser activity, and it not only potentially puts you yourself at risk, but potentially all of your activist friends, your comrades, your collaborators. When they can see who you're talking to, who you're communicating with, they can use this information not just to invade your privacy, but as a starting point to map out your networks, to map out who you communicate with, and ultimately to challenge their critics, and sometimes to arrest people, to jail people, and to otherwise put people at risk. So I think this is why we see tools, privacy-preserving tools such as Tor, as really crucial to enabling the protection of fundamental human rights in an online digital world.
And
just
oh, no, go ahead.
So I just want to add one concrete example. A couple of months ago, we published the Predator Files, which documented how one company named the Intercept Alliance was developing and selling advanced spyware to target phones, but also selling mass surveillance tools that could be deployed by governments in the mobile phone networks and operators in their country. And using this kind of advanced technology, they can not just look at kind of unencrypted traffic, plain text traffic, but also, as Mahsa pointed out, they can look at, for example, encrypted traffic, who is using Twitter, who is uploading videos to Instagram at a certain time when a protest video gets posted. And so all of these technologies could potentially be used to identify people who are citizen journalists who are posting stuff anonymously online. And we're not using tools such as Tor that give strong and meaningful privacy. There's very little that individuals and activists can do to protect themselves from these threats.
And I want to stay with this for a little bit because 2024 is dubbed the year of democracy, with up to 2 billion people going to the polls in 65 plus elections across the world. So this is the biggest election mega cycle in the century. And I'm opening this up basically to all of the panelists, but I mean, so what are some of the things that you're bracing for? I mean, we've seen obviously mis and disinformation attacks, internet attacks on journalists. So maybe I'll just start with a round robin, whoever wants to go first. But what are you bracing for, and specifically, what did you do to prep within your respective professions to face for the challenges ahead this year? Maybe Cecilia, I see you nodding along.
Yeah, so we had an election last year. We are not part of the 32 million people you talked about. So one of the things that I saw is voter apathy because of a lot of misinformation and disinformation on the online platform. And as I said earlier, English is not our first language. So you find a lot of groups, let's say WhatsApp group, Facebook group, which are speaking vernacular language, and a lot of disinformation in this group. And unfortunately, also the politicians take advantage of this. It's unfortunate in Kenya we vote along tribal lines, so it's one of the things that has really been used against the voters. You find that the digital platform came in very big when it came to the issue of spreading misinformation and disinformation, because when we look at the biggest population in Kenya is a youthful population. They're under 18 to 35, and they consume their information on the online platform. So of course they're the biggest victims. And then also we have not, let me take that blame as journalists, we have not done a lot of campaigns on fact checking. So you find that there is a lot of misinformation being spread in this WhatsApp group, on this digital platform. And because people have not been educated on the issue of fact checking, they are not fact checking. So they end up taking that information as the gospel truth. And also we've seen, we were calling it the digital election, because a lot of the politicians were also using that online platform to be able to talk to their voters and all that. And it was the year that saw a lot of decline in in advertisement for political campaigns on major TV stations, they lost a lot because now people are not watching these big boxes anymore. They're getting their information on their hand because people are using their gadgets to get information. So you find because of the content that they're consuming, it had a lot of negative impact on the election, and we are seeing the same case which is going to repeat itself in 2027 if a lot is not done when it comes to voter education.
So Mahsa, what is on your priority list for this year, especially in terms of education and maybe fact checking and other resources that you could recommend?
Well, I mean, the American elections, I guess whether we like it or not, in every context is going to have a lot of impact. And given that, the things that have happened during previous American elections, the new tactics of misinformation and disinformation, they had ripple effects and carry-on effects into probably every single region where this has been a major issue. And so there is this fear that these new standards are going to be set, especially with, the rise of generative AI and how that its use during the upcoming election is really going to set a standard, and it will have ripple effects within even authoritarian contexts that we work in, such as Iran. And I mean, the politics that happens in the US is very much front and center in a lot of discourse and online manipulations that happen within Iran, in the ways in which, you have polarization amongst activists and civil society. And that polarization is always taken advantage of by the state to further inject pretending to be activists and, furthering the divides. And believe it or not, I think there are many contexts where Trump is a major figure. In India, where he has a lot of supporters, and within Iranian civil society, he also has a lot of supporters. And so this will have a major part. This will be a major part of the discourse and what's going to be happening with misinformation and things like that on social media. And then things that we're kind of watching out for in 2024, it's really about the new tactics for digital repression. And we've been really seeing the standards set. I mean, censorship has always been very aggressive technical censorship. But one of the new facets of censorship that has been having a major impact in terms of privacy, in terms of access to the internet, has been the sophisticated ways in which censoring circumvention tools has been taking place. And so, most folks in countries like Iran know what VPNs are, have used VPNs, but access to good VPNs, secure VPNs, that aren't malicious and run by the state, is of the utmost importance. And so that's why products like different Tor tools is especially important, having safe and secure forms of circumvention that actually work, as opposed to, users just going towards whatever works. And sometimes, those tools can be operated and used by the state to collect information. So Tor's visibility and access in this space is of utmost importance. And so that's one of the big things. And then finding more ways to support folks on the ground in terms of, the needs that they have, and ensuring that platforms are addressing those needs as soon as possible, and making their uses more applicable for the most vulnerable of users. And it's not just Iran, it's, countless other contexts where you need the platforms to start envisaging their risks and prioritizing it in the design of the technology.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to give Donncha a chance to also round out and talk a little bit about this. But I also want to give a note to our audience right now that we're about to open it up for audience questions. So if you have questions, please type them in the chat and I will ask our panelists your questions. So yeah, Donncha, so how are you staying on top of things? Especially, I think, from a technical side, like what are main things that people can do, especially as they no longer have access to tools such as VPN?
So I do think we're seeing a lot of the same digital threats and tactics of digital repression that are in some ways proliferating around the world as some states kind of learn from other states, learn what effective strategies have been used elsewhere and try to apply them on their own domestic context and their own elections. And one threat we see as particularly serious, and one we've been working on quite extensively in the last couple of years, is particularly on government spyware. As we see, in many cases, governments who have purchased these very expensive and highly advanced tools from commercial companies are then able to turn them and use them very directly on their high-profile political opponents. You can imagine a government being able to target the leader of the political opposition and the strategists coming up to an election can really disturb the balance and disturb the fairness and partiality of these processes. Just in recent months, we've seen this spyware being used to target civil society in Serbia right before the election that happened in December. We've also seen spyware being used in India over the last number of years, but again in recent months, where we target high-profile investigative journalists and a number of political opposition figures. Again, coming up until the new national elections in India this year. And so this is a threat that we continue to see as very damaging. It's maybe something that's not necessarily going to affect everyone out there, but just these tools used against a relatively small number of political activists, organizers, and journalists can have a massive destabilizing impact and be very damaging to democratic societies.
Yeah. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to shift gears a little. We currently don't have any questions in the chat, so if anybody has a question for our panelists, now is the time to ask them. But I do want to shift gears a little bit and talk about some of your own personal strategies that you use to kind of stay sane. I know it's a lot of important work. It's emotionally challenging work. We're all exposed to personal tragedies as a result of dealing with people's personal experiences. And so I would love to learn a bit more about what you're doing in terms of self-care to stay on top of things, to stay healthy, to re-energize in order to be able to continue with your work. So I'm gonna start with Mahsa.
I guess my greatest self-care strategy is that I try to limit my time on social media as much as possible. I unfortunately still have my Twitter or X account, but I try to not log on to there because, yeah, the discourse about this kind of work, especially in the communities that I've worked in, has been very difficult and harsh. So generally having less exposure to social media has been my strategy.
Cecilia, what has proven to work for you to stay sane in the face of all these extreme situations that we're often facing? Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
Yeah, you told me not to be on mute. Well, it's the same thing that Master say. I try to limit my time on social media as much as I can, because also, as I said, our audience are all over social media. So if you're not like careful, you can find yourself like consuming too much, and sometimes what you're consuming is on the negative side, because you find there's a lot of negativity, especially again as journalists, especially when it comes to the election time. You find, because there's always this notion, especially in Kenya, that you're either supporting this or supporting that, and sometimes because of where you work, there's always an assumption, or you're supporting this, so anything that you say people will always find fault. So I try as much as possible not to be on social media, or also not to engage too much with the audience as much as I can. And also another thing is trying to look at the trends of the people, especially when it comes to you reading what is happening online and trying to create stories that will enlighten people about what they're assuming it is to be. Yes.
Danica, what has worked for you?
Sure. I think we all spend a lot of time online in the connected world, and so of course there's steps to take to provide some level of security and safety online, which can help give that peace of mind to begin. But also then I think it's good to look at some of the positive things that have been achieved over time, and to connect with activists and communities where using various tools such as Tor, using forensic tools to help people check and verify their phones can help turn the tables somewhat and help people be empowered, so less feels so lost in an overwhelming battle, but to be able to also fight back and to have some agency to challenge these abuses that are happening out there, and making sure that this can be known about and people can then kind of protect themselves. And so, of course, trying to also connect with friends and allies, they're re-energized when the struggles get tough.
Yeah, I will say that is a similar tactic that I use, and obviously I'm very supported by my own team, but really having the ability to vent, to share, and also understand that there is a larger community who is shouldering the burden. That is always reassuring. We have no questions for you guys for you folks in the chat, but I would love to give you another opportunity to just plug any projects that you might be working on. People have been asking how to connect with you, so maybe if you want to, now's the time to tell people how they can find you, follow you, support your work. Cecilia, why don't we start with you?
As I said, I'm a podcaster. I have a podcast. It's called Digital Data Podcast. One of the major reasons why I started Digital Data Podcast is I realized that the issue of online violence was very invisible in mainstream media, and I needed a platform to be able to talk about it because I could see what we were going through, my fellow colleagues were going through. And through it, I started talking about digital rights and issues to do with just online safety. So check out Digital Data Podcast. It's on all platforms. And you can follow me on X or Twitter, one of the two, as Cecilia. Yeah, and also let's keep talking about the issue of misinformation and disinformation, because we are losing so much because of this issue. And especially now that we are in election time, because we end up making the wrong mistakes when we elect the wrong leaders, and we've seen it around the globe. So let's try and be champions of this issue in our own small way. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Donncha, where can people stay in touch with your work, and what are some of the projects that you wanna highlight today?
Sure. So people can follow our latest work, but on research into how surveillance practices happen against civil society, and also to have some explainers to understand what people can do to also protect themselves from these threats. So all of this is available on our website. It's at securitylab.amnesty.org, and this is regularly updated with recent material and recent information to keep people informed. If people are interested, we also have a technical deep dive into how Predator works and some various mass surveillance tools work. So if you want to understand what is the current state of commercial surveillance, that's quite a good place to start. I think we increasingly see that technology that was very advanced in 2013 with the Snowden revelations kind of served a bit as a roadmap for many other private companies who could then develop these tools and then market to many states around the world, and kind of raise the bar for surveillance. And so I think that blog post is quite a good intro to what how the current system looks and what people should be aware about.
Thank you so much. And also, let's not forget that Amnesty just recently launched an Onion service as well. So be sure to check that out. And Mahsa, we started with you, we're ending with you. So is there anything else that I've missed, and how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can obviously check out article19.org. That's if you like what you see. There's an option to also donate. But also there's a lot of great work you can do in terms of, building or creating connections using different Tor services for Iranians and making that available to host, in terms of making circumvention tools available. Yeah, that's about it.
Thank you all so much. And also thank you to Andrew, and thank you to Raya. It was such a pleasure having the conversation with everybody today, learning more about your stories. If anybody feels inspired to tell us their story, we still have the survey up that has ultimately created the story sub that we've presented to you today. And if you want to get in touch with our community team, we love it when people bring information about Tor to their community. So we have many more resources on the outreach page. So please be sure to check out the resources that we offer, and yeah, stay in touch. Thanks for joining us this morning or this evening, wherever you are in the world, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.